I'm Greg Johnson. Welcome to Countercurrents Radio. I have two special guests today. I have Matt Flavel and Alan Turnage from the Asatru Folk Assembly. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you for having us, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon.
Yes, yeah, I met you, Matt, years ago out on the West Coast. I haven't met Alan until today, but we've corresponded recently. And I go way back with Asatru. I'm not a follower of it, but I'm one of these interested parties who's sort of been watching the development for a couple of decades now. And I thought that it would be great to have a conversation about what you guys are doing and how the Asatru Folk Assembly is growing. So could I just begin by asking you gentlemen, first Matt and then Alan, for the people out there who are just total novices, normies, newbies, what is the meaning of the word Asatru and what is the AFA about?
All right, so word Asatru is a combined word that means troth or loyalty to the Æsir. And the Æsir are, the gods of Northern Europe as expressed by the Old Norse. The Asatru Folk Assembly is celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. And we are the Church of the Æsir in Midgard, calling our folk home. We are a fully functioning church religious organization that practices and propagates the religion of Asatru. Currently, we have 4 Hofs. We are working on Hof number 5 right now. And we have been tremendously blessed by the Æsir over the last, certainly over the last 30 years, but a lot over the last 10.
Yeah, Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that sums up the beginning. That's a great introduction. And Allsherjargoði, although specifically an Old Norse word, we practice it as a pan-Germanic religion. So everybody from Greece to Scandinavia to England to the Western Balkans, all welcome.
Okay, that's useful to know. So how did you find Asatru? I'll ask you, Alan, and then go to Matt. How did you find it? And did you have a religion before you discovered it?
I grew up in a pretty strict Christian denomination, strict Constructionist Church of Christ. But then I sort of plumbed to the bottom of that and found my way out, wandered through Buddhism and Taoism, and then worked into kind of paganism and was in a pagan group for a while. And one of the facilitators there said, this is kind of what you are, and kind of shunted me off in the Asatru assembly. And as soon as I found it, I knew this was where I needed to be. It fit me pretty exactly. I had always been, it felt like something I had always been rather than something that I became when I found the faith. It was just cool to find that there were other people already doing it.
Yeah, that's great. It's like coming home. So what about you, Matt? How did this happen? And did you have a previous religious belief or education?
So I grew up generically Christian, if my parents had to, be pinned down on what we were, because they were probably as loosely affiliated. I think it was a cultural thing more than anything else. And then because I've always been a real, fairly spiritual person, certainly a spiritually curious person, I was a Jehovah's Witness for a time before I found Asatru. And I had a hard break with that and, knew about history and decided, what did our folk have before, a Middle Eastern religion came in. And I thought I was the only person doing this by myself. But when I got online to do some research, I found the AFA and found that other folks were doing this in the modern world and were taking it serious. And you said, it's like coming home. That's kind of one of our slogans, but it's not just a slogan. It's how so many of us felt when we first found it. And, hopefully how folks still feel when they come home to Asatru.
So I taught for a while out on the West Coast. I was living in Berkeley, California. And there was a group of people there who were into Asatru, and I went to a couple of their gatherings. And I won't mention any names. I know Berkeley has some connection with the origins of the AFA, but these people were, well, I guess you would have to say they were very multicultural. They were very sort of woo-woo, new agey, pagan. They put on some actually really good events. I think I attended 3 of them. But it was odd because the people who attended them were kind of standoffish. They weren't particularly friendly. I sort of wandered around feeling awkward going to these things. A lot of them were kind of weird and gross, to be really, really frank. And they had a kind of universalistic approach to this religion. And I understand that there's a difference between universalistic and folkish Ásatrú. Can you explain that distinction?
Yeah, certainly. First, as just kind of a point of fact, there's no such thing as universalist Ásatrú. Folkish Ásatrú is redundant. But for those that are curious, there are certainly people who are absolutely strange and gross that think they practice Ásatrú. But a lot of that, realistically, the situation you described with likely the people that, us and folks in the audience picture are attending those events you mentioned, they're typically viewing this as another, plank in their generic smorgasbord of what they perceive as paganism. And very often it's not so much a positive paganism as a rejection of, social propriety and appropriate norms. And folkish Ásatrú is certainly not that. It's traditional in the most fundamental sense of the word tradition. And it's not licensed for degeneracy. As a matter of fact, our ancestors were known for their, moral uprightness, especially contrasted with other surrounding cultures. So that's really not a thing. And I'll say this, the universal practice of our faith has really diminished over time. That's not really a divide that I see that often anymore. I see people in the AFA and I see, other folks that have yet to join the AFA, but I don't see a lot of that universalist crowd. Maybe it's because I no longer run in, any kind of circle where there's that overlap.
Well, this is more than 20 years ago now, actually. There were a couple of things about it that I already mentioned that I thought were, well, how to put it? If you want your group to grow, you certainly don't make strangers and newcomers feel unwelcome. And they really did that very poorly, I thought. It was very cliquish and odd. And later I was in a conversation with another person who was somewhat affiliated broadly with this strand of paganism. And the question of what paganism meant came up. And it was fascinating to me because this person really wanted to define paganism or neo-paganism as a marginal outsider critique of some kind of established religion or culture. And she actually went to the point as far as saying, so for Roman paganism, for me, that would be something like the mystery religions, the subaltern cults, the outsider things, not the actual civil religion of Rome. And I thought this is a very fascinating divide here because what's going on is these people have basically identified paganism with, being teenagers who's mad at mom or something, or people who feel disaffected with the dominant culture and religion of their society. And so if they define it that way, it will never become the culture and religion of a society. It's always a counter religion or a counterculture, which I think is completely contradictory to the spirit of any actual healthy religion. It's the mainstream of a society, or wishes to be the mainstream of a society. And so it doesn't surprise me that this kind of stuff might fade away for a while, but I guess there are always going to be people who want to define themselves as outsiders and rebels. But they're the kind of people who would probably get upset if, say something like Asatru actually became the mainstream religion of a society. Then it wouldn't be pagan as far as they're concerned.
Well, if they got upset, we would find some way to balm their wounds, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important that you point that out, because I think it illustrates a couple of things. It's one of the reasons that we don't typically refer to ourselves as pagans. I mean, obviously it is factually the case, but the word itself is a Christian word to describe the other. And I think that's the same with a term like heathen. It's why we use Asatru, as it's a proactive what we are about, not that we're those guys over there that don't do the normal thing. And we've seen that come and go. I think it's a blessing that some of the edgelord thing is so flaky and comes and goes, because you see the same people that would be very, very edgy and punk and gothic and whatever else. All of a sudden, a number of years ago, it became edgy to be, quote unquote trad. And so you get the same people trying to do that. And it's just putting on whatever the new edgy, nonconformist, uniform of the day is. And that's absolutely not what we're doing. It's really important that we're defining Asatru on its own terms and not as an anti-Christianity or an anti-establishment. It's its own unique, independently upright and standing tradition.
And you certainly identify part of the issue and why we fit into this, let's say, unique niche, because most of the neo-pagan stuff is fairly left-wing. We are not. And then when most people think of traditionalism, they think of Christianity, which we are not. And I think of myself as a radical in the true sense of the word, in the Latin root, meaning going back to the root. We have examined, I think individually, when you come to Asatru, and certainly at the level that Allsherjargoði and I practice it, we've examined this stuff in pretty close detail, and we try to bring the practice and the profession of the faith into the modern age, but with the, in the way that instead of trying to reconstruct what our folk were doing 1,500 years ago, if Wotan was alive today, what would he be doing? And that's what we're trying to bring to the folk.
Mm-hmm. Well, this brings me to a couple of questions that are related. What happened with the old religions of Europe, in the Mediterranean, in the far east of Europe, and in the north of Europe, is they were extirpated in various ways by the coming of Christianity. And the traditions have been severed. They've been broken to some extent, perhaps completely. And the question then becomes, well, how do you revive an old religion that was killed off? And how do you do it without being what some people will basically parody you as, these are just a bunch of people who were LARPing as Vikings, right, with horned helmets or whatever. How do you bring back something that's dead, or did it really die? I guess that's the question. How authentic is this connection with the old religion?
So our gods are real, and if you're looking at religion through a scholastic cultural phenomenon it becomes really different. But if you're looking at it as a religion and as a people's relationships with their gods, it is authentic in the fact that it's a real connection between us and the Æsir who continue to exist. It's not starting completely fresh. It's very much a reforging, like Sigurd's sword, it is reforged together to be stronger and to, take the pieces that we've inherited from our ancestors and forge them back together in a cohesive whole that comes through consistent gift cycling, and it comes through the blessings of the Æsir. It's a fundamental that we believe that in 1968, the Æsir, specifically the All-Father Odin, reached out and spoke to our founder, Stephen McNallen, and that moment of inspiration brought us to where we are today. But it's been the consistency of the gift cycle over that time and sincere prayer and dedication to our gods, and hopefully along that way getting blessed with wisdom and understanding that connects us. It's important that we become as knowledgeable as we can on the lore that's available to us, but our religion doesn't stop in the Viking Age. It's a religion that pre-existed the Vikings by thousands of years, and it's a faith that's eternal as long as our folk and our gods exist.
And that force has been pushing its way through and tried to arise again in Germany, in Australia, in England at various times. And it finds what Founder McNallen called vectors, that we are instruments that the gods find to bring their will back into the world. And so by expressing the will of the gods and by doing our duty, we are bringing this faith back, an old faith for a new age.
One of the analogies that I think is really useful for understanding how you can revive old religious traditions is the revival of authentic performance techniques in classical music. Because there's a tradition of performance, but this tradition was changed over time. Instruments were changed, tunings were changed, things like that. And yet, when people were looking back to music from the Baroque and the Renaissance era, and they realized, okay, we've lost something here. We're not playing it the way that it was originally played. We can't hear what it sounded like. Maybe we can recapture how they did this. And so there were treatises and records on tunings. There were actual instruments, original instruments around in museum collections. You could reconstruct these instruments and the tunings, and you could look at the scores. But ultimately, what you had to do to really get back to the old performance techniques is you had to actually perform. You actually had to practice. And when the practice began, people were doing it in a kind of mechanical way, which is the way things are when you practice any kind of music. It starts out kind of mechanical. And then the necessity of performance sort of teaches you. You're aiming at making this sound its best, right? And what happened with these authentic performance practices over time is they just got better and better at it. It seems to be more and more a reflection of something that was alive once and then it was lost and now it's been regained. So yeah, you can look at texts. You can look at history, but you have to actually try and bring this back as a practice. And when the practice begins and you get more fluent at it, then the thing really starts coming alive. And I wonder, what is the role of performance, religious ritual, religious practices in this revival, and how has it changed over time? How did it start out, back in the 60s, and how has it continued since then? Has there been an evolution in your practice as you feel like you're getting this right or getting this more dialed in?
So it's funny, and I think it's a good way to start. And I know the way you use the word, but performance. So when it was, again, I've only been involved for the last 24 years or so, but when folks started reforging this, a lot of the ritual structure was we don't know what to do. This is what we think it might have been similar to. And there was a lot of performance art involved. People tried through various means of what they could deliver the best, make the best show of. And I don't mean that inauthentically, but as a place to start without having any experience, figuring out what that might have looked like. Some people took that in a really dramatic, like a ritual drama direction. Other people would draw on what they knew or what they assumed and see what works. Over time, what I've found, ritual has become more and more genuine and from the heart. It's been more and more a direct connection between our folk and the gods. And a lot of that's been built on experience with what the Æsir approve of and what garners their favor and what may not as well. And over time, through ritual and through consistently being part of that gift cycle, I think we've got a pretty consistent way that many of us do it that our gods seem to deeply bless and favor us with. And I think ritual practice is important. I think a lot of people confine this to that, and it's not. A religion is about your entire way of life, but it's all informed around and built upon that point of connection, which we do through ritual between us and the gods. And so, I don't think that's the highest percentage of what we do, but it's one of the most essential. And without that, we wouldn't have the faith. But it's been great to watch that evolve over time and become less of a scripted thing and a much more authentic outpouring of devotion and emotion from the folk and the Gothi presiding over the ritual, and that gift being given to the Æsir. And we've seen their approval and their blessings in countless ways.
And I can say that I have been in ritual, both conducting ritual, participating in ritual, where I have felt the presence of the gods. So I have no doubt in the reality of what we're doing. It's not sterile, and to me, it's not even really reconstructed as much as reblooming. I'm just now thinking of this, but it's like a field that is, that's blossoming again after a long period of laying fallow. The process, we have definitely evolved the way that we do things. In some manners becoming more formal, in some manners less. Back in the long time ago when I started practicing in 2005, many people wore it was called garb. You'd wear a Viking tunic and maybe a Viking belt and those sorts of things just to try to get yourself back in that space. But we have come to understand that that's not what they would have done. They wouldn't have looked, to their ancient ancestors. They would have just worn their best suit to go present themselves to the gods. And that's what we do. We have followed and do follow the architectural investigations that go into the sites, which informs how we understand and practice our faith. Many of the laws that were written, we can look at what the laws when the Christians took over. We can look at what was prohibited, and those were for lack of a better word, Matt doesn't like it, but the pagan practices that were forbidden when the king became Christianized. What were they forbidding? The rituals that we were conducting. So we can look at that negative example as what we, again, as some information about what the way that our faith was practiced. We can also look at lore that came down, the Eddas, although imperfect. When Snorri was writing stuff down, there's an open debate whether he was writing these things as a Christian who was kind of deriding and specifically misinforming the practice, but he certainly, at the very least, copied down the lore and brought forward the stories of the gods. And even like the Grimm's fairy tales and the folklore that came down to us through the centuries that were collected mostly by the Grimms, but by hundreds of other scholars as well. Those sorts of things bring in as Matt mentioned, the whole way of life. It's not just what you do once a month on a Saturday. It's how you live your life, how you view the world, what your philosophy is. Philosophy, religion, worldview, those should all be the same thing. And that's whole and holy have the same root word. And the more holistic we can be in the way that we approach this faith, the more that it can fit with the Western culture and the Western way of life, and readopt this faith and this practice for the modern era and for our folk.
I have no assumption, I have no pretense that, through some act of magic, if a Viking were transported to one of our rituals, that it would be the same. It wouldn't be. But I hope he would understand what was going on, and I'm confident that he would. And I don't think that if he were transported back to, the Neolithic times, that the ritual would be the same. The essence and the understanding and the importance of it would be understood. And I'm confident that it would be. And just kind of a note on Snorri, I do think that Snorri was trying to authentically tell the faith of his ancestors. And a quote I ran into by him just the other day, which is, I don't know, hadn't struck me before, but in his advice to the skalds who were, continuing the Eddic tradition, he says, "Do not lose sight of the splendid tales of the fathers, but remember always that these legends are to be used to point a moral or to adorn a tale. Do not to be believed or to be altered without the authority of ancient skalds who knew them. Belief is sin, but tampering with tradition is a crime against scholarship." So in that way, I do think that he was a fairly honest broker.
That's a very interesting quote. It's actually very encouraging. We've talked a bit about ritual. What about life in general? Because as you emphasize, yes, this is a religion that encompasses the whole of life. It's not just a ritual you do once a week. Have your lives changed in positive ways, perhaps some in negative ways, as you've lived into and in the light of this new religion that you've come to?
Yes, 1,000 times yes. My life has changed in amazing ways. Alan just talked a little bit about the idea of the whole and being holistic in our practice. The more that my beliefs, my daily life, my family, my politics, my interests have all coalesced in a harmonious and synchronized way, the blessings have really poured out. And I don't know if everybody listening to this thing may believe it or feel it the same way, but I met my wife through the practice of Ásatrú. We did a naming ceremony for my daughter. She's grown up playing at the hofs to our gods and building relationships with other AFA members at our hofs and in the practice of our faith. The gods have blessed me tremendously through my participation in Ásatrú, and I am deeply, deeply thankful for it. I would not trade it for anything in this world.
And I'll say that right about the time I was really steeping myself in the practice of Ásatrú, I took a Kundalini meditation course, at teacher's training course, and so many of those folk who were taking that course adopted Sikh names. It was through the Yogi Bhajan's tradition of Sikhism, and so they were sort of again, like we were talking about at the beginning, they were taking this little one course from the buffet and taking their little, and taking this part as Sikhism and, trying to cobble that together with their, with the rest of their new age smorgasbord. But like any other thing that's, a combination of wood and plastic and metal, it just doesn't fit together well. Whereas what I've done is taken that practice and brought in out the practice of rune mantra, which is called Galder, and using that both in ritual and in my own personal meditations. So again, incorporating that holistic structure of the entire faith that we practice into a unified for me, progress toward some kind of higher realization. The other thing that I think brings a lot of folk to, and certainly has helped me in the way that we understand this, is that Asatru, in addition to having a strong relationship vertically to our gods, we have a strong relationship to each other. And so we are answerable to each other for the acts that we do. One of our sayings that we repeat frequently is that we are our deeds. And by and through those acts, it holds you in a way that that you know that it's not just that Santa Claus is looking over your shoulder. It's all your neighbors are looking over your shoulder. All the folk in our church are looking over our shoulders all the time, and we're accountable to all of them. And that horizontal relationship is equally important. We are a folk. We're not just individuals practicing an individualized religion. We're a folk who stand together before our gods.
Just on something that Alan just said, if I could, so many people might confuse or think that religious practice is about what you believe. And it's fundamentally not. It's about what you do because of, or, in light of those beliefs. There's a tremendous ignobility in having those beliefs and then not acting upon them. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind.
So folks, if you out there in Radioland would like to ask some questions of our guests, you can do that in a number of ways. You can do it my favorite way with a super chat. You can do that through entropystream.live/countercurrents. It's on the screen. We can also take DLive tokens. I believe Odyssey might be doing donations again. If not, that's fine. You can also just send us questions in the various chats. And you could also email me at editor@counter-currents.com. And we will try and get to all questions, of course, Asatru related questions in the course of the stream today. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Also, scrolling across the screen is runestone.org. That is the website of the AFA. If you want to find their presence in the World Wide Web and then maybe find their presence in the real world, start at runestone.org. And so I want to ask a couple questions here. These are questions that I imagine people in the audience might be asking. I think I know the answer to these, okay? But I wonder if some people in the audience are wondering things like this. What is the relationship of Asatru to nature? Is this some form of nature religion, or is there an element of this religion that transcends nature? How do you relate yourself to the natural world?
No, Asatru is not a nature religion, and I think the way some people might think that it is. But we do recognize the beauty of nature and the beauty of the order that's found in nature. We believe that's crafted and instilled there by the Æsir. One of the things that is fundamental to our faith is the harnessing nature for our benefit and the overcoming the chaos that is in nature to create ordered, structured, beneficial nature. And I think that's seen time and again in our myth cycle. But something that is fundamental is to be a good steward of the things that we have and to be respectful towards the creation of the Æsir in how we interact with nature, in how we treat the world around us. I think the honor and the nobility that we treat one another is also reflected in the way we behave in our environment and the implications of that.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that when we talk about Christianity in a lot of ways, even within the AFA, there's a wide range of views about how the planet should be treated. We certainly exploit its resources, but we try to do it, as Matt said, we try to do it in a way that is respectful to the gods of nature, the Vanir, the gods of blessing and fertility. I think the more respect and gentleness, if that's the right word to use, that we express toward the planet, the more that we are blessed in return, because the earth in its own way is sacred. And frankly, that's one of the things and I started out the way I did because I know that Christianity has come back around to the idea that the earth should be treated with respect. But for so many Christians for so long, the only thing that was holy or expressed any type of holiness was the ritual toward Jesus and his Father. So that's one of the things that put me out of Christianity was that disdain that so many hold in the Cartesian worldview, that there is, that the world is sort of a binary thing. There's holy over here and there's profane over here, and what's holy is very limited and what's profane is everything else that we can see and touch. So trying to adopt that holistic worldview is another way that we express a healthy relationship with each other and with the world.
So nature isn't the holy in the sense that it's untouchable or unchangeable, because you do believe that, well, it can be changed to benefit us in particular ways. So what is sacred? What is holy in Asatru?
Life, as far as our life and how we live it, either heroically or not. The relationship with the Æsir, tradition is holy. Our folk are holy and sacred and something to be safeguarded. And that is our folk at large, but it's certainly also our families, our bonds of kinship. Mm-hmm. There's things that are ritually exalted to a more holy or a more sacred, place, like our hofts or like certain sacred locations. But the process of life here in Midgard is, in fact, something sacred and important. And something to point out that I think Alan opened the door for in his last comment was we are a life-embracing relationship. We make a name for ourselves and earn our fame in this life, in the art in which we live our life and display our deeds and our character in the world that we live in. We believe in an afterlife, certainly, but our focus is the here and now while we are here and while it is now. And so the moment is, in fact, sacred.
And forging a better world for those who will come behind us.
Yeah, so if life is this, human life is the locus of the sacred, then that would include the fact that human beings are creative creatures, that we change the world to suit us, that we impose our designs upon nature. Given a choice between the salmon and your child, you choose the child and you eat the salmon, those sorts of things. That makes sense to me. Thank you. There's some other related topics that maybe we can delve into, but before I go into that, let me just check and see if we have any questions from our audience here.
While you're looking at that, I'll fluff out
go ahead
in a little bit. It's certainly, as you say, one of the, I think, the vulgarities that is being committed against the planet right now is factory farming, for example.
Right.
It's not quite a religious thing, but it's the next best to it. The lives of those animals are literally a profanity against the God, the life force that our gods brought into being. At the same time, just because something has a degree of sacrality doesn't mean that it can't be eliminated. We kill and eat animals, and that is both in a sacred and in an everyday context, but they should be treated with respect. And I think there's a lot of analogy. I haven't really thought it out a lot, but I think there's a lot of analogy to the way our prisoners are treated. I think there's something to be said for execution of the vilest criminals, and and restitution for those who can be rehabilitated.
Yeah, if life is sacred, we have to recognize that life feeds on life. We have to act appropriately. So I take it you're not vegetarians. Well, let me ask you, are there vegetarians or vegans who are into Asatru, or is that something that you frown upon, or is that something that's totally optional, or is that considered sort of exotic, perhaps?
So one of the things that's, I don't know, frustrating but honest when people ask questions like these, so much of the challenge in our faith is to rise to the requirements of noble people to make choices for themselves. There's no, veganism is not frowned upon unless it becomes the obnoxious trying to make everybody else do veganism because it's what they do. No, I would say I don't know of any vegans who are Ásatrú. I don't know of any strict vegetarians who are Ásatrú. I'm sure that they exist. If they show up, they would have to provide some of their own food at our communal get-togethers, but no, I don't think that's frowned upon at all.
Bacon is not quite a ritual food, but it's the next thing to it.
Right.
We love it for it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you another related question then. How do you conceive of morality? Is it something where you've got a list of commandments? Is it a rule-based religion like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, or do you conceive of morality as in a different way?
So I think that there's a false dichotomy there a bit, acknowledging the tremendous amount of nuanced decision making when it comes to moral decisions doesn't abdicate the position that there are some things that are absolutely completely righteous and some things that are completely abhorrent. There is that, but the challenge in Ásatrú and the admonition is to do things that are honorable or dishonorable, things that gain your reputation amongst the gods and amongst your folk, and things that diminish that reputation amongst gods, folk and ancestors due to their ignobility, due to their disgrace. So we recognize you live in a world with a lot of different choices, and sometimes values come up conflicting, but handling them in a morally upright, in an honorable fashion as opposed to a dishonorable one. And so it's not a list of do's and don'ts as if, there's not that playbook. There's the playbook of building character to where your character is such that you live in an artful way that impresses and pleases the gods and the ancestors. In that way, I'd say it's much more of an art than a science.
Yeah, this sounds what people in philosophy describe as virtue ethics. And it seems very consistent with, say, the ethical attitudes of the ancient Greeks, too. So that's an interesting parallel there. Archie has written in with $7.44. Thank you very much. And he says, this stream is important in that it opens a door to places that people need to find. The progress of knowing to practicing, then to having the spiritual experiences like learning to play the violin. How do different folk religions work together? So I guess the question is, does the AFA have any kind of relations with other practitioners of folk religions? Or Christianity, for that matter, I guess. Do you engage in what they like to call interfaith dialogues and ecumenical get-togethers, they're very popular in the world of religion today? Is that something that you make a point of doing?
No, it's not something that we make a point of doing, or that the opportunity often presents itself, but it's certainly not something we're opposed to doing. When you mention other ethnic faiths and working together for a common goal, or at least having dialogue, I think that's completely appropriate. But our position towards those outside of our folk or our faith, it all depends on the circumstance. It's completely appropriate. And in fact, we ought to act noble with everyone that we deal with. Sometimes we have conflicting values and conflicting goals, and that's fine. Other times they work together. But what I think is really interesting is the places in society where those things do intersect. And it is interesting. I have found a tremendous amount of professional respect the times that I've had to minister to our folk who are in the hospital, or the few times that I've done, that I've gone into prisons to minister to our folk there, or when anytime I've interacted with a existent chaplaincy somewhere, there's been a moment of dialogue, and I've been surprised at how well received that's been by, the others that I've had to work with.
I think it's also true that dharmic faiths, and that's a term that I got from Acharyaji's book, The Dharma Manifesto. Dharmic faiths can exist side by side. We would never try, not only would we'd never try to impose, but we would exclude anyone who was an ethnic Japanese, for example. Shintoism is their ethnic dharmic faith. And that's, so they practice that. We do us, they do them. So we can get along and harmonize ourselves in that worldview, because, we live in a very real way in different worlds. As long as they respect the border where it is, then we don't have to, we can cross-pollinate our faiths in a certain way and find value in the way that these organic expressions of faith of the different peoples have come to blossom in the field of the world, and without trying to impose our worldview onto anybody else.
Yeah, that's nicely put. If it's a folk religion, you can sort of stay in your own lanes, I guess. There's no necessary conflict there. The Japanese are not trying to convert you to Shintoism, and you're not trying to convert them to Asatru. But I think you can probably appreciate and get and understand some of the things that they do. One of the things that was really remarkable to me was a scene in The Hidden Fortress, the Kurosawa movie, where these people who are basically refugees from an enemy that's destroyed their castle, they're in disguise, and they come across this harvest festival in the woods, and there's this huge bonfire, and you see this festival, and basically it's a kind of bacchanalian revel. You can see what's going on there. The language is foreign, the mythology is foreign, but I know this song anyway somehow. I can sort of hum along, play a few bars, and I can hum along, because there's something intelligible about that. And I think that's an interesting thing that followers or people who are knowledgeable about, say, one folk religion can do when they see echoes or parallels or analogies with others. But yeah, they still remain other, and they have their own integrity. Our friend Friedrich has written in with $20. Thank you. He has a question. Does Asatru have explicit safeguards to make sure it will never become universalist? Great show. Best regards.
Yes, in a couple of different ways. And again, in the Asatru Folk Assembly, there's no mechanism by which we can, forcibly disallow other people from using the term Asatru. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. In the AFA, it is very explicit. We have always been at the forefront of being folkish, enshrining that in our core principles, requiring that of our entrance as far as members go. And I think that One thing that ensures it is our organizational structure. We're not democratic. There's no parliamentary process of different people getting in and changing the rules on you. It is very much done through the succession of the Allsherjargoði, to where that authority rests with the person in that position, which is much more secure than a committee. And we've seen this in other early Ásatrú organizations and other related organizations, where you get enough people in that decide they want to bow to political currents and things can go real different directions. We try to safeguard against that, as best we can. And the way of doing that is kind of trusting that authority in a select few and not in a larger democratic process.
And then our hierarchy, if you will, with Matt, the Allsherjargoði, having all the decision-making authority, but before you can become a Gothar, which is God-man, or Githya's God-woman, before you can become that, you're a known entity. You have to practice with us for a long time, and then you come up through the hierarchy and are trained in our worldview. To the extent that you don't have that already, then we can, you can be educated. The AFA as an entity is in no danger of becoming a universalist expression, because those people are excluded at the membership level. People who would want to try to join that are not of our people are not allowed to become members. So, they're excluded before they ever get in the door. And like Matt was saying earlier, Folkish Ásatrú is redundant. You can say you're a universalist Ásatrú practice, but that's like saying you're a square circle. The word makes sense in an English sentence, but it's not a thing.
Is Ásatrú growing? And I guess there are two questions here. I see more Thor's hammers. I see T-shirts at gyms. I see guys with tattoos of things like walnuts and stuff like that. I see more of that. So it seems to be out there in terms of a cultural presence, a graphic design thing, merchandising, and so forth. But is it growing as an actual religion? And specifically, is the AFA growing as an Ásatrú community?
Yes, and I'd say yes on all of those fronts. I think awareness of Ásatrú as an actual faith is certainly growing. As far as with the general public and people recognizing it, I think absolutely. I think there was a time, again, I mentioned to you before the program, but, I'd wear my hammer and people would question if it's a broken cross or an anchor or, any number of things. Then I watched it to where, that's a Thor's hammer. Now, semi-regularly at a store or a random location, nice Mjolnir. And they'll even ask if I'm Ásatrú. That's a tremendous amount of growth. The AFA has certainly grown numerically, but we've grown in our practice and in our scope, I think, tremendously. We have members in 12 different countries at present. And what I think has really amplified the growth of our practice in a very practical sense is our 4 Hofs. We now have a Hof to Lord Odin, to Balder, to Thor, and to Njordr. And so we have 4 different physical locations that every month our folk gather at, engage in ritual and fellowship, and have physical places to where people in the community can literally go feel that it's real and that it exists and has a place on the map. And for what it's worth, and as silly as it may sound, it's really cool to try to type in the name of one of our Hofs on Google Maps and it populates and you get a blue line that takes you right there. That adds a level of realness, I think, to people. We've also had, a number of our folk will do, with their local group of AFA members, they'll have an adopt a highway. I know we've gotten members off of just seeing the sign on the road, hey, this is real and exists in the real world. So our real world practice has grown tremendously over recent years, and I expect it to continue to go that way.
And I'll take advantage of that to segue into a note of thanks that I want to get out in a very public way to one of the members of the No White Guilt family who financed Njordhof for us after the bank that had pre-approved our loan turned us down because of who we are. So thank you very much to those folk who made that purchase possible. It's I can tell you it was a tough couple days while we were trying to make sure that we could finance this property that we had made a down payment on when the banker called me after having pre-approved our loan and basically read from a script using very carefully parsed terms, obviously that had been assigned to him by his attorney, who basically said, we can't finance you because of the religion that you practice. The fact that got turned down, but then we had one of our, that next circle of folk that who know who we are, who support what we do, that was willing to come in and put money down so we could buy that property, and we paid off that 10-year loan in 4 years. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a nice story. That I always love it when these networks work. So another question, what are some books and thinkers about Ásatrú that inspired you and that you might be able to recommend to people who want to learn more about it?
As far as the lore to be inspirational, I think the Eddas are really important. I think that the culture of the Teutons is really important. But as far as thinkers and people that inspired me early on, as far as Ásatrú, getting involved in talking to actual participants and practitioners is what really sunk it into me. Getting involved, meeting our founder, Stephen McNallen, and speaking to him, and getting to see real people doing this and not just, theorizing or speculating on it, I think did a ton. And as I've grown, learning about some of the early pioneers of Ásatrú, like Sveinbjörn Bjarnason in Iceland and Alexander Rudd Mills in Australia, have really inspired me in the sense of this being a real modern thing that some pretty great people have spent their life building and making happen.
In addition to that direct transmission through the Eddas and which of course that's excellent work. I think the cultural tradition, I certainly got a lot out of Evla, although of course you have to unpack his compound complex sentences, but much of what he talks about in the preservation of European tradition is exactly what we are on point about doing, protecting and preserving the traditions and expression of the faith of our folk. I think Alain de Benoit, his book that I've recommended over and over again, at the top of the show when you were explaining that so much of the neo-pagan movement is just about being anti-Christian, and that where they've thrown out all of the strong, noble traditions that Christianity adopted its way into. Benoit's book on being a pagan very definitely defines them and helped me define my way out of that neo-pagan movement, because it very definitely says you can't define yourself as against that because you're still allowing that religion then to define you. Beyond that sort of thing, you can look at there's the book, The Germanization of Christianity, where the author there, whose name I forget, but he talks about how so many things, like from the cult of the saints to many of the ideas that our Christian folk, that our traditionalist Christian people rightly respect, is actually the way that the Christian church, when it came in and overtook the tribal practices, that they adopted those folk ways into their own tradition, like Easter, for example, with bunnies and Easter eggs. That's very much the Germanization of the way that Christianity has become to be practiced. And so, yes, there are those few core books, and there are hundreds and hundreds of books right outside that populate that entire that practice area. We should also mention, of course, Steve McNallen's book, Ásatrú, a Native American spirituality, where he has narrowed down and defined a lot of these concepts in a way that is very accessible to people, where you can read the stories and just get the idea of the practice and what it's about. And then if you want to come out and experience it, just like Matt said, that's really where you find what the practice is, because the practice is not what you believe, it's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the book you're talking about is the Germanization of Medieval Christianity by James Russell, which is a really very interesting book. And we have a review of the Steve McNallen book on Asatru at Countercurrents by Colin Cleary. And Colin Cleary has published a couple of useful books at Countercurrents. One is called Summoning the Gods, and the other is called What is a Rune, that deal with Asatru. And I'm working now on another collection of his essays called What is Odinism? So that'll be out later this year, just to plug his work. He's also done a whole bunch of essays that haven't been collected that deal with these sorts of topics. So you can find a lot of that at Countercurrents. Just type in Colin Cleary or type in Asatru in the search bar, and a whole bunch of stuff will come up. So
yeah, sorry, I apologize to Mr. Cleary, who I had the honor of meeting traveling through Idaho fairly recently, and got to share a couple of meals with him. I have a great deal of respect for the way that he has brought, and especially his book Summoning the Gods. It definitely helped me to coalesce my understanding of a lot of what it is that we are doing, what it is that our lore expresses in the way that those stories about Odin, about the way that Odin brought order from chaos, and I thank him again for bringing that work, and for the book that he gave me when we were up in Idaho.
What is the relationship of the AFA to the Rune Guild? That's another organization I understand in North America that has a lot to do with Asatru.
There's really not, and I think there was early on. The Rune Guild was founded by Dr. Stephen Flowers, and he and our founder, Steve McNallen, are, certainly acquaintances and friends over the years and have worked together. There have been a number of people in the AFA over time that have crossed through the Rune Guild, but I haven't heard a lot about the Rune Guild being very active in a lot of their things in a great many years now. But they did, and I'll throw this out there, one of their members, Leon Wild, wrote a book about runes called the Rune Workbook. And it is, as far as an introductory book to someone who's maybe, young, high school age folks, or somebody who's completely fresh to it, I think it's a really good primer on the runes, and I think it is very, very accessible. So anybody interested in the runes and the Ásatrú worldview that surrounds them and gives them context, that's a really good book for that. And also their core curriculum, the 9 Doors of Midgard, is really beneficial. And it's a lot to chew on, but especially their first couple of doors in that book, I've gotten a lot of benefit out of, using that early on in my Ásatrú practice. And I think that's really beneficial, but there's not a lot of current interaction going on there.
Okay, that's interesting. I have a question here from Jace. Does Ásatrú seek to emulate the Æsir? When you spoke of honor earlier, what does an honorable life look like? Is it obvious to say what a dishonorable life looks like. So that's 3 questions there. But you emulate the Æsir, first of all. Is that how you understand your practice?
No. And I think, again, forcing that into a binary yes or no, I think is complex. I don't think that the point of the Æsir is for them to be instructive as things to model ourselves on, as opposed to be instructive as gods we want to build a relationship with and invite into our lives. We're not gods, we are people. And I think that functions, really differently. But I would say, as far as the follow-up questions, I wish there was a very clear-cut, hey, this is what a noble life looks like. This is what an ignoble life looks like. And I think we recognize them when we see them. But I think the noble life for an IT professional in 2025 is likely very different looking than for a Viking raider in 800, than from a, Germanic farmer in 100. The actualization of facing your life's unique circumstance with a dignified and honored practice informed by our tradition and in light of the judgment of the Æsir and the ancestors and your folk, it's a very complex thing, but we certainly know and celebrate when we see it, and we're very aware, and we shame it when we see the contrary.
It's interesting because I would answer in the exact same way, except I would say yes, we are to emulate the gods, although not in that. It's certainly not in some precise exact way, but in the story, like for example of Tyr, sacrificing his hand, his good sword hand, so that his folk could survive. We can look to that as an example of what a noble life looks like. It's certainly not that direct pointing where you can do something that looks exactly that way, but those sorts of examples do allow us to inform our discerned understanding and our judgment about what a noble life looks like. And it's like like the Supreme Court justice says a long time ago, we know it when we see it. And it's one of those things where I've often wished that we were a more rules-bound religion, if I were making the rules, where we could say, yes, this, no, that. That would make this easy. It would make it, it would make Matt's job easier, my job easier, and the job of our folk. We could just, track along the rules, but it's not. We just have to walk along that razor's edge and try to discern in each modern situation, how it is that our folk way informs the decisions that we are forced to make.
So in the chat, we have a comment from Placeholder. What the AFA is doing is critically important for all people of European descent. God's bless you, Matt and Alan, and God's bless the AFA. And Archie agrees with that. Ron Boardman writes in the AFA, there are many with quite a few years of longevity in worshiping the Æsir, which leads to knowledge, maturity, and a pious nature being dominant. We've seen pain, growth, change, and victories. Much dead wood is cleared away over the years. The AFA knows what works on Midgard and Asgard. That's a good point. Basically, with time and experience, you learn things. You learn things and grow. I don't think you need to apologize for not having tablets with rules on them, because rules need to be interpreted, and interpreting rules in the light of what's going on around you is an act of judgment. And judgment is seasoned through experience, and it wouldn't be judgment if you could predict in advance what you're going to decide in every given situation. So I think it's a recognition, though, that there's a kind of knowledge that you gain from practice. And that is a higher form of knowledge than the rules, any set of rules that are put down. They have to be interpreted. So there's this active judgment that takes place, and polishing your ability to judge in the circumstances happens with time. And there's a natural authority of people who are older and more experienced. There are old fools in this world. There's no question about it. There are people who've gone through life and not learned a damn thing. But if you go through life with your eyes open and you hone your ability to discern what's good and bad in particular circumstances, you're a natural authority that other people can look to. And of course, then there are heroes from the past. You can look to them and wonder what would they do in those circumstances. You'd be naive and childish to think, well, Tyr cut off his hand or lost his hand, so we should all cut off our hands, right? That's contrary to the spirit of any kind of wise religion, I would think. But that would be the sort of rule-bound or LARPy or merely imitative approach to things, which, thank God, you're too smart to fall into. Let me see if we got any more questions and comments here, and then we can wrap up, because I don't want this to be too long. I want people to be able to wrap this up and immediately go and investigate more about the AFA. So, gentlemen, how do people find out more about the AFA? We have the runestone.org URL. But are there other ways that people can find you? Do you do podcasts? Are you on various social media platforms and things like that?
Absolutely. First, and foremost, runestone.org, and thank you for putting it on the bottom of the screen. That is a great place to go and find out who we are, what we believe, what we're doing, and to find contacts for the folk builder near you. Our folk builders are our local representatives of the Asatru Folk Assembly, and each and every one of them would be happy to field any of your questions, get you involved locally, or sort you out on where you need to go. But we also, every Wednesday night, we do a live broadcast on a variety of platforms, on YouTube, on Odyssey, on X, and a variety of other places, called Victory Never Sleeps. And that's every Wednesday at 6 Pacific. And I think we're almost at episode 160 on that. So we've been doing that for a little while. That's a great way to go. And to look us up on YouTube, you can find the archive of all of our previous shows. If there's a topic that interests you, chances are if you have questions, there's one of those that you can find that'll help you get closer. Or if you tune in live, you can ask any question you want and we'll address it. That's what I would suggest. As far as social media, X is our biggest outlet right now, as well as, I guess YouTube doesn't really count as social media, but it crosses the sphere a little bit. Yeah, you can find us on X at Folk Ásatrú. Yeah, but any of our contacts, our Gothar, myself, or our folk builders, please feel free to email any questions you might have, and we will answer them to the best of our ability and see if we can help you out.
That's great. So are there any final thoughts, any final words that you'd like to impart to our audience out there?
I'll start so Matt can have the last word. First of all, I want to thank you again, Greg, for having us on. I have a lot of respect for Countercurrents. I read it and stay current on all the articles. I'm a member of the website. I forget what it is that you guys call it, but
thank you for subscribing. Yeah.
Well, you're welcome. I think that what you guys do brings the right tone of both of information and the philosophical underpinnings of what it is that we are all trying to do in our own ways to protect the zeitgeist, the world spirit of Western civilization. Our folk ways, our religions, our viewpoints, our folk are noble and worthy. We are worthy of respect and worthy of tradition. And thank you for the hard work that you do in protecting our faith and of our folk ways and making sure that it continues into the future.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate that.
I'd like to certainly echo that. Thank you for having us on the program today. It's always much appreciated for us to have opportunities to talk to people who may not know about us or who may have questions or things they'd like to learn. I appreciate getting to speak to your audience. I would like to, I suppose, leave people with this. I know that I am aware that the most difficult thing is very often going from a place of inaction to a place of active engagement. I jokingly say that like the greatest distance is from the couch to the door, but it really is. And I think we all have had that feeling. So I would encourage everyone out there that conceptually likes the idea of Ásatrú, thinks that it would be really cool or it should be really cool, or, you know, it's something one of these days they might do. Take that initiative and be Ásatrú, participate, join the AFA and meet with your folk and be part of it. We're doing absolutely amazing things, and we would love for all of our folk to come home to Ásatrú. Like I said, there's a lot of people cheering us on from the sidelines, but get on the team. We would love to have you. So thank you.
Well, that's really beautiful. That's really well said. Thank you guys for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. And I do hope that this has been educational, but more than educational, I do hope that some people will actually take that step and reach out and get in touch. So that's a nice way of ending the show. And we will be back next week with another episode of Countercurrents Radio. We have not yet determined the guest. There's so many things going on. I'm trying to get Eric Orwell of the Back to the Land initiative on for an interview as soon as possible, because he's now in the crosshairs of the global establishment for wanting to basically live among his own kind. Apparently that's not legal in America. So I will definitely try and get him on board. There are a few other people I'm trying to get on the show, Chris Brunette for one. We will let you know there's no shortage of things to talk about, and there will always be new current things to talk about. So we will be back next week with some guests. And until then, just keep reading Countercurrents. Thank you.